A theorist, a thinker, a scholar, a writer, and a man who has spent a lot of his time trying to make change in positive ways, that Phil does not just do what he does because he wants career advancement, because he wants to be the head of an organization. He does it because he has a genuine feeling of love and commitment to what he does and to the people he works with. And it comes through in everything he does, whether it's, like I said, in this position, in the students he teaches, in the things that he writes, in the songs that he sings. And therefore, it's an honor for me to introduce tonight's keynote speaker, the president himself, Mr. Phil Rose.
Thank you very much, Brian. I would also like to start off by also thanking everybody on Karen's team who has been just so wonderful in making everything happen, and to Karen also for such a stellar event. And in the end, it's worth all the craziness. I think I can attest to that myself. So thank you very much for that. And that goes also to other people on the board who have been doing things to make the organization to move the way it should. So I promise not to keep you very long, but what I want to do is I want to just begin by telling you how I came to media ecology, because I had the good fortune of discovering the MEA online around the year 2000, and so I was able to attend the second annual convention in New York that Janet so ably organized. And but I came to media ecology through Roger Waters of Pink Floyd. And for those of you who don't know the reason for that, Roger Waters titled his third solo record "Amused to Death," and didn't take too long for me to discover that this was based on Neil Postman's book of the same name. And so back in the day, I was doing my master's thesis on Pink Floyd, and that's when I discovered Neil Postman's work. And when I graduated from my master's, I was pretty much done with academia for the time being. I decided to go to Europe for the bulk of 1996 on a European tour, just to sort of get a different kind of education. And when I returned from that trip, I happened to see Neil Postman on television because his new book at the time was The End of Education, and he was talking about that. And so I read that book with great interest. And however, there was something in the book that I found unnerving. And it was so unnerving that I had to write to Neil Postman to tell him how unnerving this was. And I just happened to have the letter here from July 11th, 1997. And I just wanted to share most of it with you because I think you'll find it fun, maybe. So here's how it starts. Dear Mr. Postman. So I'm sure you appreciated that already. But this is how it went. Dear Mr. Postman, I've just finished reading your last book, The End of Education, and have found it to be a very inspiring read, for which I would like to thank you. It has reinforced my previous suspicions that I must read some of your other pre-amusing ourselves to death volumes as well. It is only because of my appreciation for your work and due to my faith in the influence that it will have that I contact you now about the matter below. It is also because of the type of person that I think you must be that I suspect you will appreciate my efforts and find some fun in them too, I hope. As at least one of your own books is very often used as a textbook, of which you must certainly be aware, I will quickly refer to your statements about textbooks from the latest book. Quote, we would start with the premise that a textbook is a particular person's attempt to explain something to us and thereby tell us the truth of some matter. But we would know that this person could not be telling us the whole truth, because no one can. We would know that this person has certain prejudices and biases. because everyone has, we would know that this person must have included some disputable facts, shaky opinions, and faulty conclusions. Unquote. What I hope to do is expose for you, Mr. Postman, your own disputable facts, shaky opinions, and faulty conclusions. In a certain area of reasoning in this latest book, which makes an appearance in your discussion of music. You may, I hope, acknowledge them both to your own students, and maybe even in your next book, perhaps. The statements are contained in this passage. Quote, "In the case of music, for example, most American students are well tuned to respond with feeling, critical intelligence, and considerable attention to forms of popular music, but are not prepared to feel or even to experience the music of Haydn, Bach, or Mozart. That is to say, their hearts are closed or partially closed to the canon of Western music. I am not about to launch into a screed against rock, metal, rap, and other forms of teenage music. Nonetheless, the level of sensibility required to appreciate the music of Roger Waters and Pink Floyd is both different and lower than what is required to appreciate, let us say, a Chopin etude. And we have a somewhat similar situation in respect to other art forms. There is, in short, something missing in the aesthetic experience of our young." Unquote. Firstly, I would have taken great offense to your pronouncement of these genres of music as teenage musics if it weren't for the fact that I've heard such things for far too long in the past and have grown insensitive to them. Secondly, I agree that the level of sensitivity required to appreciate the music of Roger Waters is different from that required to appreciate that of Chopin, or that of any other composer for that matter. I do not agree, however, that the level of sensitivity required is lower. Thirdly, I agree that there is something missing in the aesthetic experience of many of our young, just as you describe. I must, though, suggest that there's also something missing in your own. For many people can appreciate both the music of Chopin and that of Roger Waters or Pink Floyd, but you do not seem to be included among them. So, and then I had sent him portions of what I had written, of course, and so I end by saying, I would be most happy to hear your views on the ideas eventually, and hope that you will not hesitate to send them on to me. Thanks again for an excellent book, and also for continuing to care. And now the best part of all that, was Neil's reply. So here it is, August 15th, 1997. Dear Mr. Rose, thank you for your letter and for sending along some sections of your book. Your trust in fax technology is misplaced. Not everything got here in one piece, including your accompanying letter. Enough of it, however, did get here, so that I know you disagree with my view that an appreciation of certain forms of modern music, that is rock, impede the full appreciation of classical forms. As a matter of fact, the person who is typing this letter for me also disagrees with me, and strenuously so. Nonetheless, I continue to believe it and will end by saying that I could be wrong. So the way that was phrased, I really couldn't come back on that, so I thought I'd better go to New York and try and meet Neil Postman, which was why I was moved to go to the second annual convention, because Neil was going to be hosting a panel there. And so in advance of that panel, there was actually the business meeting that was going on at the time, and it was going to occur after the business meeting. And like any newbie, I'm not really interested so much in the business, but I was going to get there, to get a good seat to see Neil Postman. And so I'm sitting there waiting, sort of towards the back, actually, at this time. And lo and behold, who walks in and sits down beside me but Neil Postman? And so here I was, quite in shock, and I introduced myself, and I said, you know, I'm very happy to meet you, and I was really looking forward to the possibility of possibly talking to you about technopoly and American pragmatism. And he said, that would take a long time, because he had another commitment across town after this. So that conversation never got to happen. But anyways, it was great to have that chance to briefly meet Neil and of course to get to know the Media Ecology Association on that occasion. So one thing that I should make reference to perhaps is that I'm actually the first Canadian president of the Media Ecology Association. And some of you may remember how Marshall McLuhan said that Canada is the only country in the world not to have a national identity, which is an interesting remark. And I mentioned earlier my European tour that I had taken. And just to give you a sense of how that's true, to some extent, how Canada is the only country in the world not to have a national identity, I think I was on a train in Denmark. And looking out the window of the train, watching the geography go by, and suddenly in my head came the song American Woman by the Guess Who. And for the first time, it occurred to me the significance of the fact that the group singing the song were Canadian. And it had never really occurred to me before. But if you don't know the material, there's a verse particularly that's quite potent. It goes, I don't need your war machines, I don't need your ghetto scenes, colored lights can hypnotize, sparkle someone else's eyes. And so this was a moment of me starting to think, oh, there is some elements of Canadian identity. And one of my first trips to that MEA convention, I was really shocked at this convention because everyone kept mentioning Marshall McLuhan constantly. And I'd known that, Postman always refers to McLuhan at points. And the interesting thing was I had never read McLuhan. I had, in fact, read a book by Eric McLuhan before I ever read any Marshall McLuhan. And, but this was quite an experience for me, especially also to find out, the significance of the Toronto School of Communications and whatnot. And it really started to give me a bit of a sense of being Canadian. And when I heard all this discussion about Marshall McLuhan, it gave me the same kind of feeling that, as you may know, McLuhan had an ongoing sort of correspondence and relationship with the Prime Minister of Canada, Pierre Elliott Trudeau. And Trudeau wrote, after McLuhan's death, to Corinne McLuhan, his widow, a letter. And in the letter, which I unfortunately couldn't track down in time to come and to refer to it, I can tell you that in the letter, one of the things that Trudeau says was that Marshall McLuhan and his work had made him feel proud to be Canadian. And so this is actually how I felt when I was at that first MEA convention. So, here I am in New York and hearing all this discussion about Canada. And it's interesting because McLuhan sometime I think in the late 60s, wrote an essay called Canada, a Borderline Case. And in that essay, he says the following, and this is, I think, a very interesting statement. He says, nature and history seem to have agreed to designate us in Canada for a corporate artistic role. As the USA becomes a world environment through its resources, technology, and enterprises, Canada takes on the function of making that world environment perceptible to its users and occupants, Canada takes on the function of making that world environment perceptible to those who occupy it. Any environment tends to be imperceptible to its users and occupants, except to the degree that counter-environments are created by the artist. And so even McLuhan has this sense of Canada having this specific role in the modern age. And so when I came to the MEA, I also learned about how this idea of media biases really originated with Harold Innis. And so, there was all this stuff that was making me feel good about being Canadian and kind of proud. And so, moving particularly now to discussing the biases of the MEA, I can say that in my experience, the MEA was really kind of like a counter-environment to the university, much in the way that some programs on CBC radio are, to the extent that they alerted me to traditions of thought which the university kind of ignored, but which I felt were very important. And so we can talk about now how the MEA is becoming a world environment. And this is something that is going to, of course, continue as we attract people from various parts of the world. But for me, the interesting thing about the MEA in my own experience is that, the discussion about McLuhan's point about the fish in water, that the fish is not aware of water, much like environments are subliminal and they have to be sort of studied in order to know their true sort of character. And about a year and a half ago, I was visiting Janet Sternberg in New York, and we were talking about the Media Ecology Association and all sorts of things. And Janet was talking about, and I thought she was sort of maybe just being kind of nostalgic a little bit, but I was listening, and she was going, you were our project. You were our project. We were part of your sort of family. And I was kind of going, yeah. But after the whole discussion, I realized actually that it was like the fish in water, that I really didn't actually perceive what the MEA and my relationship to it had been. And just to give you a quick itinerary of that, the MEA was certainly the first academic convention I ever attended, and it's probably certainly among the first that I presented at. My first academic publication was in the academic journal, Explorations in Media Ecology. The first organization, thank you, of which I've ever been an officer is the Media Ecology Association. First time I ever organized and hosted an international convention was for the Media Ecology Association. The Media Ecology Association has taken me to places like Denver, Colorado, places I've never been, places like Mexico City, places like Santa Clara, California, places like Orono, Maine, Edmonton, Alberta, Grand Rapids, Michigan, Boston, Massachusetts, all places I'd never been before. And of course, next year we're being taken to Italy, although, strangely enough, I've been to both Bologna and Rimini already. So, Janet kind of framed it that I sort of came up through the MEA sort of ranks, as it were. And so, suggesting that maybe I have some insights, because I've been around so long, to the organization and some of the characters that are part of our organization. So that may or may not be true, but what we'll do is I just want to rehearse what I see perhaps as the biases of the Media Ecology Association. And some of you, in fact a good portion of you, will be familiar already with this delineation of media biases. But there's certainly going to be some people here who aren't familiar with this. And so I just want to give you these sort of propositions, and I think they were put together by Christine Nystrom in this form. But first I'm going to read them to you, and then I'm going to discuss them. So here's the sort of first statement of biases in terms of thinking about media ecology. Because of the different symbolic forms in which they encode information, different media have different intellectual and emotional biases. Secondly, because of the different physical forms in which they encode, store, and transmit information, different media have different temporal, spatial, and sensory biases. Thirdly, because of their differences in physical and symbolic form, different media have different content biases. Fourth, because of the accessibility of the symbolic forms in which they encode information, different media have different political biases. Fifth, because their physical form dictates differences in conditions of attendance, different media have different social biases. Sixth, because of the ways in which they organize time and space, different media have different metaphysical biases. And then lastly, because of their differences in physical and symbolic form and the resulting differences in their intellectual, emotional, temporal, spatial, political, social, metaphysical, and content biases, different media have different epistemological biases. And so, just to return to the first, so because of the different symbolic forms in which they encode information, different media have different intellectual and emotional biases. Well, generally, we manage to keep a healthy ecological balance, I think, between intellectual and emotional biases, though, as Ron Diebert reminded us last year in his keynote address, we don't always get along that well. So sometimes the balance gets a little disturbed. But generally, there is a good balance between intellectual and emotional biases. Part of the other way that the Media Ecology Association has recently been mediated has been we've supplemented our annual meeting and our convention meeting with online meetings in between. And it's quite interesting because we use Paul Sukup's program, and I'm not sure what it's called to tell you right now, but basically it looks like Hollywood Squares. I don't know if anyone's used this platform to have a group discussion or a group meeting, but it looks like the old Hollywood Squares, and it's always a little bit funny, and therefore the intellectual and emotional biases are always a bit kind of in sway there as well. We're also mediated by our listserv, which of course is text-based with hyperlinks, no attachments. But I've often thought of our listserv as, if there's no blasphemy involved, as sort of the mystical body of the MEA. And I'm reminded of McLuhan's line that in the electric age we wear all mankind as our skin, by which he meant that not only is there harmony in these sorts of closeness that results from that electric age, but there's often a lot of friction as well. So again, a balance often is there on the listserv. Our website features words and images, and we're very thankful to Robert Francos for many of those images that we find. And I have little doubt that we will find a lot of photographs from this present convention there shortly after we all return home. We also have our new bibliography project, which, if you weren't at our business meeting today, is our attempt to make a big database of media ecology research in our mission to promote media ecology internationally. And it's also, we perceive it to be a benefit to you, our members, as well, because we hope what you will do is take advantage of that to upload your research that pertains to media ecology, or is perhaps could be called media ecological research. And we've got a wiki in this new bibliographic project for which you can do that, and you can see the instructions on our website to find. We also sort of strive to produce some videos and whatnot for the website soon as well. and that would be things from our conventions often, as well as possible symposium ideas that we've had as well in the past. And of course, most important in terms of the mediation of the Media Ecology Association is orality, because that's when we get to come and share each other's personal spaces and have face-to-face interchanges and fellowship with you. And very often that results in us making music together as well, which it can't be really a better sort of situation in the oral context. Moving on to the second one, because of the different physical forms in which they encode, store, and transmit information, different media have different temporal, spatial, and sensory biases. And most of us occupy different spatial and temporal environments. And so our temporal biases sort of come into play when we have online meetings synchronously across 3 different time zones and 3 different countries, as we have in the last couple of meetings we've had. The spatial biases of the MEA, we're both multinational and intercontinental, though we're rooted in New York State, where we're chartered and incorporated. In terms of temporal bias, again, I would say that most of us are in the business of combating what Harold Innis called present-mindedness. Most of us have quite a historical sort of perspective, and we strive against just a simple focus on the present. I could speak about the continuity, which I think is going to be the result of our new constitutional arrangement for the organization, where we have a person who will be voted in as our vice president-elect, who will coordinate our convention that year, not necessarily be the host, but coordinate with a host or host it themselves. And then this is sort of gets a person on the treadmill, because the vice president-elect will the following year do the convention and be the vice presidents. Following that, they will be the president of the organization, and then they will end their term with a year as the immediate past president to among other things, just contribute all the experience that they've probably had in the previous 4 years in trying to help put on the convention. So we have this new constitution in rotation, and so I'm hoping that that will propel us with good sense of continuity into the future. We also, I would say, kind of have, I think, a healthy balance between sensory biases, though probably we're not going to contest the fact that McLuhan would probably call us a bunch of POBs, which, if you haven't heard that one before, is print-oriented bastards, according to McLuhan. And though we probably are print-oriented bastards to some extent, and visually inclined, as he would put it after that, I think when I look around, there's quite a very healthy embrace of presentational forms, as Suzanne Langer would call them, and sort of non-discursive forms that would represent being print-oriented bastards. So I would actually say, really, I think we're very much in balance that way as well. Moving on to number 3, because of their differences in physical and symbolic form, different media have different content biases. So in our work, we direct our attention towards all types of media, and this affects our content, of course, and whether it's people writing books of fiction, books of nonfiction, making videos of various sorts, writing academic articles, writing blogs. It manifests itself in poetry, as we've witnessed at this convention as well. Sound recordings, many of us are recording artists as well. There is even juggling involved in media ecology, and also complex musical multimedia works like Thus Spoke the Spectacle. And if you've been to our conventions in the past, you'll know what I'm talking when I refer to that work. Fourthly, Because of the accessibility of the symbolic forms in which they encode information, different media have different political biases. And that sort of was meant to refer to something like the role that Latin played in the Middle Ages. Or we could also point to literacy itself as creating political biases as well between those who were literate and those who weren't literate, or in the present as well, of course. English is sort of our lingua franca, so among some of us, English isn't our sort of mother tongue. That doesn't seem to stop all those who are here and who don't have English as their mother tongue from impressing us greatly, because they do, and they continuously do. And so I don't know if there's any political biases there. I know that when we were in Mexico, I believe a lot of the presentations were in Spanish, and I don't know that we're adverse to a multilingual kind of convention. We'll have to talk about that in the future, I think. But we could say that there is a political bias in making English the sort of lingua franca. I don't know what we're going to do about that. I think it might be beyond our control. The bibliography project, though, I think is hopefully a sort of democratic kind of thing. That is, if you can afford our membership, which of course some people can't. But there we would hope that people would promote not only their work in English, but in other languages that they've worked in as well. And so make it truly a kind of complete database. The other thing is, in terms of accessibility issues, and say putting them aside, the bias of being here is the sort of membership, I think, in a community of common interest and common efforts, putting together a journal of which we can be proud. Moving to number 5. Because their physical form dictates differences in conditions of attendance, different media have different social biases. And no doubt some people aren't with us today because either they're in poor health or the travel is too onerous, too far, too expensive perhaps. And no doubt that's going to affect some of us for going next year to Bologna, unfortunately. In terms of conditions of attendance, I tend to get to see my media ecology colleagues twice a year because I've been going to the board meetings for the last bunch of years. But it is really only twice that I get to go. Sometimes I used to go to Niska, but funds aren't quite as munificent as they were. But we do have other events at organizations like the ECA, the NCA, the CCA, which is the Canadian Communications Association, and just then, I would also, mentioning the NCA, like to thank Dennis Calley. Where's Dennis? Dennis, thank you very much for the work you've done in terms of preparing our work for the National Communications Association. We've much appreciated your efforts. And we are constantly looking to make sort of affiliations with other groups and to promote the MEA. And so if you have any ideas of organizations that you think it would be worthwhile having an MEA presence at, please come and speak with some of us and see what we can do about pursuing some of those possibilities. Moving on to number 6, and we're almost done. Because of the ways in which they organize time and space, different media have different metaphysical biases. And so I've sort of mentioned our organization is mediated by text quite a bit in various ways, and I'm reminded in that sense of Marcel Proust's point about reading being the miracle of communication in the midst of solitude. We can think about when we use audio-video recording and the disembodied music we might be hearing, or when we're discarnate on the telephone, or in Paul Sukup's Hollywood Square meetings. These various forms of metaphysical interaction are some of the features of our experience. In terms of other ways the organization is mediated, I remember showing up at a convention, and I can't remember which one it was, but I saw Tom Jancarelli sitting at the desk, the registration desk when I arrived, and we were just getting ready for the first sessions, and I said, aren't you coming? And he goes, no, I'm going to be at the registration desk. And I go, oh, well, that's kind of a drag. And this wasn't even Tom's conference, but the point is that when you do host the conference, you kind of are sort of there metaphysically and not always physically present, as I found in Toronto last year when I felt like I missed a lot of the conference. So when you take your turn to host the convention, that's something that sort of tends to accompany it. The other thing is that we're certainly mediated by what René Girard refers to as mimetic desire, which is to say that we all sort of imitate one another's desires to promote media ecology. And in Girard's thinking, desire, unlike instinct, is actually a metaphysical phenomenon. So getting to the last proposition, because of their differences in physical and symbolic form, and the resulting differences in their intellectual, emotional, temporal, spatial, political, social, metaphysical, and content biases, different media have different epistemological biases. And one way in which we demonstrate these epistemological biases is through the speakers that we invite to come here. And in ways we identify with them and they represent us and who we are. And thank you again for being here to speak with us, Nicholas Carr. And Joanna Drucker as well. In terms of epistemology and what I think a lot of people have maybe been thinking and learning in the time over the last few days is that media ecology really doesn't keep out the humanities, the social sciences, or the sciences. What we do is we try and make use of all sorts of knowledge when and where we get it from, and we don't leave those areas or reject any of those areas of consideration. And we recognize that they're all mediated by history, which is a very important thing to recognize. Similarly, I think our discussions yesterday were indicating to us that we don't expel religion from serious study and seeing it as a domain of serious attention and concern. And that can't be said about all intellectual traditions. And partially, I would say we're also epistemologically oriented towards activism. Many of us are activists in one way, shape, or form. We have one of our awards is named the Jacques Ellul Outstanding Award for Activists. And so this is part of our values and something that many of us pursue in our work as well. We recognize the role of good imitation, good mimesis, to use Girard's word again, and the importance of good mimetic models or good models of imitation. And I can say that I've found a lot of good models of imitation since I've been joining the Media Ecology Association and their conventions. And so, of course, one of the reasons that's important and one of the things that we care about is mentoring graduate students. And so we're always very pleased when people bring along their graduate students, or undergraduate students for that matter, because we've had them as well. And so I would encourage you to please bring students along with you when you're coming, because importantly, of course, not only for graduate students, but often for the rest of us too, there are all sorts of opportunities to publish your work with us, the possibility of academic service opportunities, and you don't actually have to be on the board to be a sort of a participant in assisting us in this mission to promote media ecology. So if you have any sorts of ideas that you think would be beneficial for as the media ecology ship forges forward, I hope that whether this is your first convention or not, you'll share some of these ideas, whether they occur to you already or whether they occur to you in 2 weeks' time when maybe you're assimilating your time here with us. So, in closing, I want to make just reference to Lance Strait, and I don't know if it was with students, but he developed one of these online memes that you would find on Facebook and perhaps other social media environments. It was called "Which Media Ecologist Are You?" And when I took the test, and I sort of heard or overheard or was lurking on a lot of the, people saying, I got this person, I got this person. And funnily enough, I didn't ever hear anybody say they got Peter Drucker, which is who I got. And interestingly, I've never really read Peter Drucker, despite wanting to for many years and knowing that there's certain things worth looking into with his work. But what I hoped that sign might be that perhaps I had some kind of managing potential or something. So all I can say is that I hope that as the president of the MEA, that I haven't let the ship go off course at all too much, maybe some turbulence and whatnot, but I hope that I've in some way been able to leave it somehow even just a little bit better than I found it. And so with that hope, I'll thank everybody for having come and been part of our annual event, and I hope that we'll get to see everybody, if not in Bologna next year, in some future convention setting, because many of us, sometimes we haven't seen people for 2 years, but it's just like continuing from where we left off. So I look forward to continuing from where we left off, and please, hopefully we can have some fun tonight, perhaps back at the hotel. I don't know what people are planning to do, but we will work on that and figure that out as we go. So thank you very much, and all the best. Thank you very much, everybody.